Right, so for those who want a short, succinct video on this guy, this isn't going to be it. And vice versa for those who want to know how you turn it on and how you log into the DJI app, this isn't it. Head over to Andy RC, who will show you in depth how to do that and then not show you any flight footage. So this is going to be my take on the DJI goggles and air unit, which I basically shoehorned into the Gap RC Mark IV, and I did that by basically removing the standoffs which should sit here and replacing the standoffs with two self-locking nuts which allowed the unit to the room it basically needed. And this guy also comes in a HD version, so if you're looking to get the DJI version and you like the frame, just get the HDI version and save yourself the hassle. Mine has broke here, and essentially what it's done is broken its screws. So I've had a huge, or not huge, but a big crash directly into a tree, and it hasn't broken the arm, but it's basically broken the little brace plate which sits over the arms, which is no big deal. It's a tiny little bit of 2mm carbon, but it is a bigger deal because you can't get that spare that I'm aware of. However, happily Unmanned Tech have come to my rescue and have stuck me some in the post. But if you're after a frame for the DJI, it's not a bad option because it's pretty cheap and pretty sturdy. Just be aware that you might have to do a bit of carbon cutting to make another brace plate. But that aside, so I shoved my unit into the gap, and I kind of want to start off by saying I've put as many packs through the DJI system as I can. I put 5 or 6 packs through on my usual open field, and everything is always going to be hunky-dory in a location like that because you can crank the quality up high, you don't have any latency, and you know, it looks absolutely fantastic. So that was my test flight. The more serious flying I did was in a really heavily wooded location, a really tricky spot for me, one I'm not massively familiar with. I've been there 3 or 4 times, and at the best of times I always found challenging, but it's a place that I know I get bad RF and struggle with RF. Sorry, puppy here. And I struggle with RF. So I took the DJI unit and my quads there the other day and found my lost 8-inch, which has been run over by a tractor, and I basically tested it as much as I humanly could do, and these are my thoughts about the system so far. In terms of basics, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The air unit itself is relatively tricky to deal with for our purposes. Excuse me, I've got a puppy crawling around the camera. It's relatively tricky to deal with in our circumstances, and that's for a few reasons when you're dealing with a tight build. The number one is that the thick wire which connects the two together is sat bang in the middle of the camera, and that eats into a lot of space at the front of any quad you put it in. The other thing that's irritating is the two antennas mount via MMCX on the back, right angle MMCX, and that sort of makes it really difficult to mount your antennas. You end up sort of twisting them and wrapping them around to sort of wedge it into this sort of mount, and I don't think this is the best way to mount these. I suspect they'd be much better maybe towards the middle of the frame and with longer mounts so they can sort of stand proud. But that's how I've been running mine. In terms of the rest of it, I'm not, as I said, I'm not going to spend hours going over the ins and outs of it. The goggles themselves are not massively comfortable. You get light leak in a lot of areas unless you wedge them onto your face, and they don't really fit a face well, so you end up sort of using this part of the strap to sort of keep them on. Having said that, when you're flying with them, it all gets forgotten about because the image is so big and bright and colourful. You kind of forget that there's a little bit of light leakage. You don't really notice it. So I want to start off this video by saying this isn't, in my opinion, a one goggle system. I wouldn't feel hugely comfortable having this currently as my only set of goggles. And the reason for that is A, the air unit itself makes it very difficult to fit in the majority of quads. None of mine fit it at all really without doing heavy modifications, and that's largely because I tend to run low profile, skinnier frames. But so that's the number one reason. I don't think it's for first time flyers or those moving into the hobby. It's too restrictive in terms of the quads that you can use. You know, you won't be flying whoops with it or anything like that. It can be used with analog, and I did try that. With the Furious FPV Docking, it's unflyable via AV-in. There is huge latency to the point that I don't know how big the latency is, but it must be 1 second or so because it's unflyable. Running the AV-in via a secondary set of goggles, in my case the Sky Zones, it was absolutely fine. But both of my analog quads that I was using were using, one was using a Foxeer Predator V2 and the other one a Foxeer Falcor, and the image of those cameras blown up on a 5-inch screen is absolutely horrific. Okay, you could get used to it, but it's really not pleasant. You know, those cameras are poor and at the best of times, but on such a huge screen, those issues become much bigger. So I need to change my existing quads, put in the Cadex Ratal and the Runcam Eagle, and see what it looks like then. But they're my early impressions. But I think in terms of can you get analog to work on it, the other thing is the Furious FPV Docking has its own separate HDMI add-on, and at some point, not anytime soon, I'm going to possibly look and see if putting that add-on onto Docking and running it via HDMI output from the Docking into the goggles gets rid of that huge latency, but that's something for another day. So let's get to the flight footage. So basically the first thing I did after test flying, everything worked all okay in my usual tree spot, is I took it to the place where I lost the 8-inch quad, and I'm flying this system on basically a freshly flashed Betaflight board using 4.1 with RPM filters, and the quad is flying frankly absolutely awful. So I didn't spend a huge amount of time tuning this quad because I just wanted to sort of enjoy and fly the unit. So in all the flying footage you're going to see, there are going to be random twitches and vibrations which I can't really account to the DJI system. I can account to the fact that this quad flies like a piece of shit, to be blunt. And while it's a little bit better now than it was when I originally flew it, it needs a hell of a lot of tuning. Having said that, quick shout out to Stephen from Superfly, who's going to send me what he believes will get any sort of similar setup running 4.1 into a pretty flyable state, which is, you know, fantastic for me because frankly I don't have time to mess around tuning and black boxing Betaflight. I just want to fly, which is half the reason why I've gone to KISS. So that aside, the first thing I did when I got here, after making sure everything was all okay, I'm in this open location, but behind me there's very deep woods. And the first thing I do is take the quad out to the location I lost this guy, because sort of 300 meters or so out in this giant open, what was a huge maize field, there's sort of a left-hand corner, and when you go around the left-hand corner, you sort of immediately behind, you know, 100 meters, 80 meters of trees. And this is where rapid fire completely crapped out on me, and I lost video, powered up. The video didn't return, and I subsequently lost the quad because I was stupid enough not to put a self-powered buzzer, and I wasn't using GPS logging on my Tyrannos. And my first impressions are wow. You know, I take the DJI unit past this location that killed rapid fire. You know, I go another, I don't know, 50 meters maybe past it, and obviously at this point the DJI system is breaking up. I'm getting a lot of pixelization, but it's still relatively flyable. And then I decide that I don't want to walk, you know, all this way out to pick my quad up, so I sort of turn home and fly, and you can see me sort of testing as I'm inching my way through. And at this point I'm kind of sat there thinking, well, okay, rapid fire failed here and the DJI quad has successfully flown through it. You know, this is amazing. And before somebody jumps on me in the comments, I'm not comparing the two. I'll come on to that later, but it's a really good sign. So I basically move into, as you can see, this heavy tree location. And this system has a few different ways of setting it up. If you're in an open field, you can run it in high quality mode, with all the DVRs recording, the DVR recording and the HD recording in the air unit. But the minute you take it anywhere near trees, A, you need to go into focus mode to reduce the latency, and B, you'll see that focus mode, the minute that it focuses on foliage and the complicated structures of foliage and the amount it's got to sort of render, the amount of pixelization. You alright, Hamish? The amount of pixelization you get either side of the screen is initially quite distracting, but you soon get used to it. And with regards to the actual image, you know, of course the image is, you know, incredible. It blows away the sky zones, or, you know, all the other sort of stuff that I've enjoyed in the past before. There's no doubt about it, even on low quality, low latency focus mode, which is what I'm running here. But it has some peculiarities. The camera itself has a sort of odd habit of, one minute it looks glorious and the next minute it's like it sort of loses all its colour. And I've noticed a few times when I'm flying both into the sun and in changeable light conditions, it seems to struggle. It doesn't have the adaptability of a really good FPV camera. Having said that, you know, in relatively flat lighting conditions or in sun, if you're not flying directly into the sun, it looks absolutely amazing. So anyway, I sort of mooch around and I'm enjoying just flying this spot and seeing it in glorious Technicolor. It's sort of like, you know, you're seeing the place for the first time. Generally, when you're flying this location, you don't really see much, you're sort of reacting, and with the DJI system I'm seeing obstacles way earlier than I generally would do. But that in itself almost creates a problem that you've got to get used to, because you'll be flying along and, you know, you see a tiny little gap underneath a tree or between a tree, through some foliage from, you know, 40 feet away, and it's crystal clear, and you know that because you've got this crystal clear video, you can point your nose and the centre of the camera at this gap and you'll sail through it, and you wouldn't have even seen that gap or knew it existed on an analog system. But then the system itself kind of trips you up in a way, because as you enter this sort of location, just as you're about to hit it, it'll have a habit of giving you a little bit of pixelization. And quite often that pixelization is right where you want to be looking. And it's not bad, but it's enough to take away that fine detail that you need in that moment. So the system almost kind of asks you to fly in a more dangerous and pushy way, because you can see so much clearer and you've got so much more time to react. And then it almost sort of punishes you in a way, because when you go for that, suddenly you find you're looking at a blurry image, you know, and you can't see what you're flying into. And maybe that's a bit harsh, but that's sort of what it feels like. The other thing I don't like is the actual camera angle, I think, or the field of view is about 140 odd degrees, But when you're in focus mode and you've got these two blocks of relatively persistent pixelization either side of your screen, that field of view is brought much closer in. And I got used to it over the course of a number of packs, but initially it's quite distracting. It feels to me like the DJI camera needs a much bigger field of view to get around that. So I'm used to flying the rattles and the predators, and maybe they've got, I don't know, 160 60 degrees field of view perhaps. But either way, they don't have this sort of narrowing of the image, and it felt initially relatively distracting. In fact, when I first started flying the system, I made the image smaller because I was struggling to cope with the amount of detail. I found myself getting distracted by, everybody says it, the blades of grass and bits of twigs and stuff that you just generally can't see, birds and stuff like that. And it takes a bit of getting used to. Now, there is one spot where I sort of go through all these woods and then basically I loop behind the back of them. And this isn't a place I would go on an analog system, even using rapid fire, because it would be, if you managed to get through it, it would be sketchy at best. I don't really like flying, through black and white rolling images. But I took the DJI system round, and what you'll see is it loses its sort of signal, and it lets you know that by basically the screen becomes really, really blurry, and you've got this flashing RSSI on the bottom left of the screen in red saying that you've got low signal. And at that point, you can't really see it, but you can see it jerking and speeding up. Then the system basically decides it's not going to record anymore, so it turns off your recording. And at this point, what I do is essentially just land. And I'm sat, 100 meters, 200 meters back, however far it is, I'm sat down basically. So what I do is I casually land, I stand up, I get a little bit more video back, and then I just slowly sort of inch my way through this blur until the image quickly comes back again. So in that sort of circumstance, it wasn't too bad at all. And you sort of get actually you get quite a bit of warning before it's going to, drastically go. Certainly enough for you to sort of drop low and get ready to disarm or, turn back. So that point of it doesn't bother me too much, and it only tends to sort of become unflyable in terms of pixelization when you're literally about to lose it full stop. There are a couple of other quirks it did. When I was flying high over these trees, and again I'm sat down, I'm in a bad position, I'm not stood up, I'm not looking at the sky, albeit we're using Omni antennas, so it doesn't really matter. I've had a few sort of, what are they called? I call them RSSI warnings, but that's probably not the DJI term, but you get this sort of like an RSSI display on the bottom left of the screen, and then you have the latency on the right. And this thing flashed up several times while I was sort of at the other end of this tree area, as you can see here, right sort of flying high. And that area is certainly not an area that I would be losing video with rapid fire or a normal system. I would certainly be getting breakup, but I don't believe I've been getting nervous too much at that point, because I'm in relatively open space, albeit the antennas are blocked by a huge bunch of trees. So there were kind of a few quirks for it. So I suppose if I was going to compare it to an analog system, I don't think it has the brute outright range. In fact, we know it doesn't have the brute outright range. But for sort of normalish flying, the sort of type I like to do around trees in a relatively smallish space, so I don't have to walk 10 miles if I crash my quad, it easily matches an analog system in the testing that I've done so far. In fact, it sort of betters it. Its penetration around trees, etc., is generally better. So, what have I got to say? I think the system, at the moment, I think the system's amazing. I had so much fun flying around and through these trees, and it really feels like you're flying. It takes some getting used to. The pixelization around the edges is a bit annoying, but again, you get used to it. The pixelization in front of your eyes is annoying, but only when you're going for gaps that you wouldn't really see otherwise. But if you're wanting a one box system and you're wanting to do long range and stuff like that, then clearly digital isn't the way you should be going right now. Now, clearly I'm running this on the BOGO antennas that it comes with, and realistically I guess we've got to expect that if you put better antennas on it, then you would get much better performance. True RC and Lumineer have both released little not dipoles, but little omni antennas for the system. And the system itself out of the box is left-hand circular polarized, so it's not like you can just stick a few of your existing antennas on to check. You'd have to replace all 6 of them, 2 on the quad and 2 on 4 on the goggles. But we've got to expect that this is the birth of a new system, and both True RC and Lumineer are claiming up to 50% extra range. And frankly, do I believe that? Probably not. But what I do believe is that if you've got good antennas on this system and you're running patch antennas or something like that, it stands to reason that you would get a much better long-term or long-range feed. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when antennas were pretty basic, before the birth of rapid fire and all the rest of it, and the fancy antennas we run these days, the majority of quads had pretty short range then. Whereas right now with rapid fire and antenna technology and all the rest of it, things are a lot healthier. But it's a difficult one to describe. I suppose the way I would summarise my feelings for it right now is, initially I was a little bit disappointed with the amount of pixelization that I was getting in those tree spots compared to the videos that I've seen elsewhere, where they're flying in an open space and everything looks gorgeous, and they're asking the question like Bardwell did, have I got focus mode turned on? That is frankly bollocks. You'll always know that you've got focus mode turned on, even if you're in an open area. You can just see it, and it's more obvious in the goggles than it is when you're looking at it on YouTube on your iPad or your phone. But once you sort of set that aside and just relax into what the system's offering you and what it can do and what it can't do, it sort of becomes really liberating and really exciting. I was going to get some side-by-side rapid fire comparisons, but I brought one of the quads that I brought with me had an issue, and I put the goggles on, and because I was using a crappy Predator, etc. I say crappy Predator. Predator's a great camera, but on the Sky Zones with its really nice OLED display, it shows its flaws. And I really couldn't bear to sort of fly analog, because it just felt really tiny and really grainy and really dull and really just really piss poor quality. So what I need to do is, as I said earlier, is go back and stick an Eagle on my analog cameras, or a Ratel, and because I know already that those make a huge difference when you're looking through the Sky Zones, because the goggles have a much better display than the HDOs. And I really need to sort of test it side by side against that. But I think because the place I'm flying in is really about as tricky a place that I'll generally ever fly, it kind of suits me to the ground, because, albeit not today because I'm flying this horrible, badly tuned Betaflight quad, but I kind of like to float and flow, and all those things, and that the system itself makes that so much more appealing. If you're a more rapid attack pilot or a racer, I don't think you would get as much out of it. And my quads had, in fact I'm not sure if it's the quads or a bit of jello, possibly, or the DJI system itself. But the feed itself, because it's so big and because it's so clear, is noticeably more sort of jerky is too harsh a term, but you know what I mean. It feels, you can almost see the steps in it. And as I said, I'm not sure whether that's my badly tuned quad or the fact I've got, you know, the camera is basically wedged into a micro camera slot that it doesn't fit into but has been forced into. You know, maybe it's a combination of all those things, but the feed itself, at least initially, takes a little bit getting used to, because it feels like you're running a relatively lower frame rate than you were on an analog system. And at this point, if you're still with me, I want to make a shout out to Unmanned Tech, because my missus has stopped watching now and I won't get decapitated. When I was first interested in the DJI system, I didn't even want to buy it. I'm not a fan of DJI. I didn't really want to get involved with them, but I wanted to test the system, and Unmanned Tech in the UK kindly offered to lend me one for 2 or 3 weeks to test it, which I was going to do because I'm getting the Catalyst Machine Works Banggood frame, or Banggood frame, and I wanted to test it in that frame because it's designed for it. So they kindly offered to send me one for review, and then I saw whose video was it? Nurk's video, where he was sort of giving what felt like genuine impressions about it, as opposed to a lot of the reviewers who seem to be, trying to get into DJI's pocket or, sell the system. And I don't think it's really a system that can be sold, if that makes sense. This isn't a you must buy it product. This is a open your eyes, make your decision based upon what you see, and be prepared to work with the system a little bit. I don't think you should go into it thinking, can I get it to work with analog? Because what you need to be thinking is, how can I get it to work better with some better antennas and all the rest of it? So Unmanned Tech kindly offered me one to review, and then I saw Nurk's videos, and I liked what I was seeing, and then I had a few beers. Unmanned Tech kindly gave me a discount, and then obviously I ended up buying one because I got impatient and had, as I said, a few beers. And I'm really glad I did. It's going to make such a huge difference to my general flying. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Am I going to be doing more testing on it versus rapid fire and analog? Absolutely. But right now, in the flying that I've done, I've just been having fun. And the funny thing is, I kind of, usually when you fly, you're thinking about doing the perfect trick or being really smooth and all those things. When I was flying this, because the quad was poor and I was enjoying just seeing something new, I wasn't really interested, or I didn't really care about how I was flying. I just flew and nosed around and had fun with it. So I'm dead chuffed with it. I really like the product. I think DJI are the spawn of the devil, and it scares me what they could do to our hobby if they get their dirty paws on it. But I've kind of gone back on what I originally said. A, because I'm greedy and I really wanted to try it, and B, because in my case I downloaded the software, updated it, and then deleted the software. And as far as I'm concerned, I've got a set of goggles. DJI can't track me, they can't see what I'm doing, and I'm telling myself this is as far as I will go with their closed ecosystem. Although, given I didn't want to buy this system in the first place and then did an about turn, who knows? So yeah, I had loads of stuff to say, and I feel like I've just sort of said the same things about 100 different ways. In terms of, I think one thing to touch on, in terms of frames for it, there aren't a huge amount of options. I've ordered the HD top plate and mid plate for my Apex, so I've got a frame that actually fits it properly. As I said, the Gap RC Mark IV HD version will fit it properly. iFlight have got a few frames knocking around which have been sort of retrofitted to take the air unit, but I don't think they look particularly good. And I've been speaking to Halo RC, who's got a freestyle frame that with a bit of work will fit it in, and also, as I mentioned earlier, Stephen from Superfly has a prototype of his flip mode, which has been adapted to take this system, which I should, if it fits together like he wants it to, be having a look at too. I've contacted Hyperlow to ask him to put an arse on the CG so I can get it into that. And of course, as I said, Catalyst Machine Works are sending me that frame. So I think its biggest problem is lack of frames and systems that fit it well. What it really needs is those older frames, the big bulky bus style frames with 35mm standoffs where you've got acres of space. So I suppose if you're running a V1 Alien or a Martian or something like that, you'll probably be able to adapt it relatively easily, but I'm not. And I think that's something to really take into account. What we really need is somebody to either fix the issue with the docking, which I believe DJI are actually looking into where this latency is coming from, but we've got to presume it's the actual docking itself. What we really need is either a docking that doesn't have latency, or a really cheap set of goggles that will run a separate module, and then you rapid fire guys can plug rapid fire into the goggles and take the feed via the DJI ones. In terms of updating it, it took about 5 or 6 times to update both of the goggles and the air units. It kept failing. I upgraded mine obviously to, or unlocked mine obviously to 700 milliwatt, which I had to do multiple times to get that to work. And in the end, the little text file that you create, I actually had to take the .txt off the end of it, and then it worked and unlocked it. So there's a bit of faff to do, but if you had a frame that it fitted comfortably into, it's a relatively easy system. You plug it in and off you go. There's not a huge amount to it, so it's certainly potentially simpler than wiring up. So to summarise, my initial impressions are it's a cracking system within its limitations. It's a cracking system if you're the average freestyle pilot and you want to go to fly around 200 or 300 meters, 400 meters around some of the thick trees and stuff like that. The system will be great in those locations. If you're a race pilot, at its best, it's absolutely fine, but the latency tends to vary from between 28 to sort of 37 milliseconds, and while that's absolutely fine for general flying, if you were on, if you were a good race pilot and you were pushing it, I'm sure you would start to feel that pretty soon. But yeah, as I said, for me, as the average Joe who likes to go out and fly, who doesn't like to walk 25 miles when I invariably crash my quad, I think it's fab. I'm looking forward to having a proper OSD. The battery voltage and timer is in the bottom right hand corner, and we've got this massive screen, but the voltage is really small. I love the fact that you can change the PIDs, and we've got a proper menu system on the goggles. All of that is absolutely great. I'm pissed off that KISS doesn't support it, although I've heard some guys are actually using almost like a redundant Betaflight board and connecting the DJI goggles to that redundant board, and then connecting KISS to it and picking up the OSD that way. But for me, that sounds a bit drastic. I think the best thing to do if you're flying KISS is just to set yourself up some timers and do it that way. So I think there's lots of exciting things to come, and I hope DJI will update the firmware. Maybe they'll clear up that central portion of the screen a little bit more, so even if everything else is going pixelated, you get a little 50p size hole that you can see crystal clear through. That would be magic. I hope they release a wider angle camera lens. I hope that they change the camera and stick this cord either at the top or the bottom, just pick a side. I hate the fact that the connectors on the back and the antennas are on the back. Stick them on the side and which will give us more options. But yeah, that's kind of it really. As I said, I'll be testing it a lot more versus rapid fire, etc. So I'll do some videos on that. At some point when funds allow, I'll get some better antennas for it and check that out. But if you're basing your decision on those videos of a guy flying around a field, that's not really what you're going to get if you're doing any sort of technical flying. You'll only get that in those situations, and those videos where even on focus mode even on high quality mode there's very little breakup, or a little bit disingenuous, as I said, because the minute that you look at a tree, the system can't cope with that level of detail and sort of creates this pixelization down the sides and to a lesser extent on the actual feed. In terms of the units, this guy adds about 5 milliseconds on when you're recording. It's not really noticeable. I recorded one set of feed on it, and I thought the quality of the recording was pretty crap, to be honest with you, worse than you would get on a Runcam split or something like that. And the fact that this guy doesn't handle light conditions as well as FPV cameras makes it, for me, not such a great system. If you just want, you're going to need to carry a GoPro if you're doing any sort of serious freestyle, unless it's on a little 3-inch or something like that. Recording via the goggles didn't seem to add any major latency that I noticed, so that was fine. The goggles automatically record when you arm, which is lovely, and it stops recording when you disarm, which is also lovely. So when you're looking at your feeds, you don't have 5 hours of you scratching your arse and working out if your props are on the right way and all the rest of it that we often get on GoPro footage at the start and the end. So yeah, I think it's a really well thought out system. It doesn't quite fit into our existing quads in the way that I hoped it might, but it's not a huge issue to fix. In fact, regarding what people are doing, there's two sorts of frames out at the moment. There's the ones like this where they whiz it in the back, and then you've got the ones like the iFlight DC, what's it called? The iFlight Titan, where they basically raise the top plate up and hang the DJI system in the middle of it. And both of these systems have the pros and cons. If you stick it at the back, obviously you've created an oddly weighted quad, but in a strange way, if you put a GoPro on the front, you've kind of got a relatively nicely weighted quad. Whereas on the iFlight Titan, by putting it in the middle, obviously that's really the best way it could be, because you've got your mass at the centre of the rotation. But by doing that, they're increasing the top plate higher, which is putting the even greater mass, which is your battery, higher still, and in a roundabout way making your quad fly potentially worse. Personally, what I want to see moving forward is a system where you get a really, really low profile frame that just has, remember the old split style top deck type frames? A bit like the Ichabod actually, or a split level motion, where you could have a normal